Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I am your host, Mike Campbell, and today I'm excited to bring you a punchy, short episode on failure. Now, that sentence might almost not make sense because failure is a giant topic, and we could spend a lot of time exploring it. But I'm gonna choose to dive into something that I think is really significant and very powerful and impactful when it comes to failure. That I think you can listen to really briefly and then take away with you and start taking some action on and shift some things in your life. And then we can explore failure in a much more depth if you wish. It's certainly one of the things that we end up doing in the world of my coaching program, the Everyday Legends Academy, because it is a big challenge for a lot of guys, the fear of failure. So let's dive in with, I was going to say a line. It's not really a line. It's two lines that I want to kind of start this with. And that is this: failure is inevitable. Being a failure is a choice. Failure is inevitable. Being a failure is a choice. So let's dive into that. And remember that failing does not make you a failure. And that is a big fucking difference. Because the thing about failure is, it's not that we're terrified of failing so much or failure itself so much as we're terrified of what we think being a failure will mean about ourselves, or what we think failing will mean about ourselves. And that essentially is that some kind of deeper fear that we hold about ourselves might be proven true. For example, that I'm a failure, which means that there's something wrong with me, which means that maybe I'm not good enough, right? So all this is to say that the meaning we can attach to the idea of failing and failure. So I'm going to repeat that. It's not so much failure that we fear, it's what we think failing will mean about ourselves and all of the meaning that we'll be attaching to that. And if we have a deeper fear or belief about ourselves that there's something wrong with me, or that I fear people will think there's something wrong with me, then failure is a kind of could be seen as an avenue towards that, if that's my lens, but it's not. And so what happens is we make the leap from I failed to I'm a failure to there's something wrong with me to I'm not good enough, or something in that vein. Right? We take one failure and we catastrophize it into our whole identity. So it's no surprise that we will avoid situations, opportunities, conversations, relationships, challenges that put us at risk of quote unquote failing. Because essentially what we're doing is we have a pattern of making that leap, that failing at something, no matter how outrageously unrealistic it might be for our current capabilities, let's be clear, right? We might see something that is wildly outrageous for our current capabilities, but we have this expectation of ourselves that we should be capable of it, which means we're not capable of it. So we're probably going to fail at it or not be able to succeed at the level that it requires because it's beyond our capabilities. And we go, I'm not going to approach that in case I fail because that would mean that I'm a failure and there's something wrong with me. No, right? So we make this leap that failing at something means something really fucking significant about ourselves. But it doesn't at all. Failing does not mean anything about you at all. It's potentially data. It is there to point you in a better, more effective direction. So when I say being a failure is a choice, what I mean is that we can choose to label ourselves as a failure. We can choose to label ourselves as a failure, or we can choose to learn something and move on. It really can be that simple. And I know from a lot of personal experience just how challenging that shift can be if it is a decades-old idea that's been passed down and metabolized and digested into our psyche and our system. And there's so many examples that I have of this from working with me in the Everyday Legends Academy. And so I want to speak to this one guy, Mark. Mark was a guy who, given his history, learned, parents separated, some other things going on, mother alcoholic. One of the things that he learned to do was to have to kind of grow up very quickly and look after his siblings. And one of the many other things, but one of the consequences of that was my needs don't matter. I don't have needs. My needs aren't important. So then becoming an adult, always self-sacrificing, never choosing himself, putting himself first. But of course, he's a human, so he has needs. So they come out in really ineffective ways. Then in a marriage, all of a sudden what happens is he's in this kind of codependent dynamic where he's placed his partner's needs as the most important and his don't matter at all. So yours are more important than mine. In fact, mine don't matter. But I hope that you guess what my needs are and secretly read my mind, it's a recipe for a lot of frustration, resentment. Let's call it failure in a relationship. But one of the things that that leads into is this starting to understand as we do the work, like the importance of his own needs, the importance of communicating this stuff and not having these little things that niggle away at him where, his partner's needs come first and his don't and all this kind of stuff. And so really getting to the point of like knowing that he needs to communicate this stuff. He needs to communicate his needs. This is what matters to me. And even if those needs are, there's very simple ones, and it doesn't really matter for the context of this what they are, but also the need that your needs cannot dictate the parameters and the ground and the foundations for our relationship, because all of a sudden there's a huge imbalance there. And that's one of the things that he was having these kind of like real challenges with, that he wouldn't speak up about historically, and then he would kind of overreact, right, when the weight of that got too much, and there'd be a straw that kind of would break the back, and it would cause this shit to happen in their relationship. So then it comes to the point of needing to communicate this, like, okay, I've got to communicate this stuff. And he goes into this pattern of being terrified of doing it, knowing that he needs to be courageous to communicate this stuff. The fear comes in, and the fear is, what if I fuck it up, right? I.e., what if I fail? What if I don't say the things exactly right that I need to say? So we can already see the failure is wrapped up in so much. First of all, he's got this expectation that he needs to nail it. He's got a lifetime of not really communicating his needs, so it's not going to happen immediately in the way that is, let's say, perfect, because there is no perfect. But coupled with that, he's putting so much on the outcome, because I cannot fail, because then I fucked it up. That was my chance. You can see all these things are kind of attached to that. So the work really is to allow him to be okay with not getting it right. There is no right? Let go of attachment to the outcome on how it sounds, on how it's received by his partner, because one conversation does not mean like the rest of their life. And come back to what he's committed to, which is, I need to communicate what is on my heart. I need to communicate my needs. How she receives it, I need to let go of that right now. But I know I need to communicate this. And it becomes easier to take that step when he's let go of putting so much on the outcome, because he can't control that. And so when this fear of failure is sitting there, he's terrified to take that step, because if I get it wrong, I've screwed it up, nothing's going to happen, I'll get in trouble, we'll argue, whatever it is. Put so much on the outcome. So failure prevents him even taking the step. So the invitation there is to remember, what is the important piece? What is the important commitment? To share what is true for him and what he needs to communicate about his needs and wants in the relationship. And when his commitment can be to share the things he needs to say, it's so much easier. And in that, failure comes off the table. The only failure there, quote unquote, is by not sharing it, because he might not nail it. He might say some things that he doesn't exactly mean and want to say. He can set himself up to succeed by having some notes and whatever the case may be. But that was the thing that allowed him to actually start showing up in his relationship with more courage and saying, here's what I need. And even to preface that by saying, I want to share some things. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to come out, but I know I need to say it. Historically, I've been terrified to say these things in case I screw it up and I make all the stuff mean about how I'm a screw up. And I'm choosing to let go of that and do my best to simply show up and communicate what I need. Can you support me in that? And you can see there's literally no way he can fail in that. But that's part of the kind of strategic work of getting past this fear of failure. And what goes so much deeper than that, which was, I'm a failure, there's something wrong with me, I'm not good enough. My needs don't matter because I'm not good enough. You can see how all this stuff feeds to the bottom. So I want to be really clear. That's a random example. It might not be an example that speaks to you, but you can start to understand the fear of failure is more about what we are making failure mean about ourselves, or that what you fear other people might make failing mean about us. And at some point, we have to both let go of that, but dig into that work at the baseline, because we can strategize on the fear of failure all day. But if there's some kind of big belief about ourselves that there's something wrong with me, that I am wrong, that I'm not good enough, that I'm not worthy of love and belonging, then that's going to run through everything in your life. And you've probably, if you've been around this podcast for a while, you would have heard me talk about that in different avenues. It's not failure so much, it's what we're making failure mean about ourselves. So hopefully you can start to see at the very least, from how I've worded this stuff, just how ludicrous it can be to make that jump from failure, I failed, I'm a failure, there's something wrong with me, I'm not good enough. Therefore, we can actually start choosing the courage to step towards potential failure anyway, because failure is inevitable. But being a failure is a choice. And you can choose that failure does not mean all those things about you, but it is a piece of data to point you in a more a more effective direction. That was an interesting slip. Failure is a piece of data to point you in a more effective direction. If you can learn from it without attaching all that meaning to it, then it is simply a data point. Now, if you keep repeating the same failures, that's data. Why am I doing that? What am I doing? What am I missing? What do I need to do differently? Gentlemen, you're a human, so failure is inevitable. If you're not failing, it means you're not striving. It means you're not trying. And I would say that's kind of fail by default. If we don't choose and state what success is for us, we won't go towards it and we will fail by default. Still, we get to detach I am a failure from that. Being a failure is a choice, and you can choose not to be a failure, and that failing does not mean you are a failure. That's our show today. I trust that you get something from this, that you benefit from this, and my ask, of course, and my invitation is always to pass this on to another man that you think might benefit from this, that you think will enjoy this, that might like the cut of my jib on how I deliver content and information. As always, thank you so much for joining in. Remember to go click subscribe so you get instant access to these new episodes when they come out. And if you haven't, please go to Spotify, leave a rating for this, jump onto iTunes and leave a review as well. It's a massive way to help get this podcast in front of more eyes and ears and men who need it. Until next time, I'm Mike Campbell. See you then.